You know that feeling when you click on a random video, and within the first few seconds, you just know it's unlike anything else you've seen. That's exactly how I felt when I stumbled upon those clips of the protest in Broadview, Illinois on September 19th, 2025. At first I thought, oh, just another march, a few people with signs chanting slow. But only a few minutes later, I realized how completely wrong I was. Because what happened in Broadview that day wasn't just a protest. It was a storm of anger, despair, and strangely enough, compassion. The clash between demonstrators and federal ICE officers at the Broadview detention facility just outside Chicago became the nation's focal point, a flashpoint in the government's immigration crackdown known as Operation Midway Blitz. In the heart of America, once a symbol of law and order, an invisible war is now being fought where bullets are replaced by executive orders and front lines are drawn with political power. Sounds like a line from a dystopian political drama, yet it perfectly mirrors what's unfolding in Chicago, the so-called City of Freedom, where America now confronts the cracks within its own democracy. Chicago was cloaked in thick gray mist. The red maple trees of early autumn swayed gently in the wind, while the sting of tear gas began to drift through the western streets, toward the Broadview ICE facility, a nondescript building that had suddenly become the epicenter of a conflict bigger than the city itself. Hundreds of protesters gathered. They held up banners reading "No Borders, No ICE" and "Freedom for All." They sang, they chanted, they live-streamed, turning that bleak morning into a moving festival of humanity. Sirens wailed across the street, and tear gas spread like fog at dawn. In the hazy chaos, some people knelt in prayer, others beat drums, blasted rap music, and raised their fists, a confrontation between faith and discipline, freedom and law. The once quiet street, with its corner cafe, old bakery, and school bus stop, now felt like it had awoken inside a surreal nightmare. A place where compassion and legality collided, creating a mix more explosive than gunpowder itself. Behind the banners and the slogans was a silent but fierce confrontation, the local government of Chicago squaring off against the federal authorities in Washington. And that to me is the most frightening part, when those in power fear criticism more than chaos. A society cannot survive if those entrusted to enforce the law are afraid to use it. In Portland, silence has become policy, and that policy destroys trust faster than any tear gas bomb ever could. According to ICE data, during the summer of 2025 alone, over 1,200 people were arrested in the Chicago area, many of them with no prior criminal record. Local officials pushed back, arguing that the cost of maintaining the detention facility was far beyond the city's budget. But ICE countered, saying it was a national obligation. The central question seems simple: which law truly represents America? Yet that very question was tearing the country in two. On one side were those who believed that humanity must come before the law. On the other were those who insisted that if the law ceases to be law, society itself will collapse. Meanwhile, the city government issued a short statement. "We acknowledge residents' concerns but remain committed to protecting free expression." Legally correct, but to many it felt like abandonment. The order to disperse rang out, but no one moved. Seconds later came tear gas, batons, and screams, then chaos. What began as a humanitarian rally turned into a battlefield, the clang of metal, the cries of people, the endless click of phone cameras, capturing every second of the chaos. A woman sobbed, her voice breaking, "We just want freedom! Why are they hitting us?" And in that moment I thought, this was no longer about politics, this was about people. The scene was broadcast not only live on social media, but also on national television. And as the tear gas still hung in the air, Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson stepped in front of the cameras and declared, "We are an ICE-free zone." 3 words that shook America.
The order establishes ICE-free zones. That means
Mayor Johnson's declaration meant this: the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement (ICE) agency would no longer be allowed to detain migrants within Chicago's city limits unless approved by local authorities. A statement that sounded like something out of a political fiction novel, yet it was signed in real ink amid tear gas, shouting, and chaos. Washington fired back, cold and firm. No one, not even a mayor, stands above the law. But Chicago refused to yield. No one, not even the federal government, has the right to violate the city's autonomy. And so, the silent war of power officially began. One side fighting in the name of law, the other in the name of humanity. Both believing themselves righteous, and that's what made it all so tragic. At dawn that morning, crowds began pouring toward the Broadview facility. Drums, megaphones, and chants blended into a chaotic rhythm. Half festival, half riot. Some people live-streamed from inside the sea of humanity. Others threw themselves in front of prisoner transport vans, turning the narrow street into a stage for a storm called freedom. A former city official once said, "Portland didn't collapse because of violence." Police reacted almost instantly. White smoke curled upward, mingling with the flashing red and blue lights, painting the scene into a canvas of confusion and fear. A man wearing a Guy Fawkes mask, the global symbol of rebellion, filmed a TikTok while shouting, "Freedom has no borders! ICE, get out of Chicago!" And amid the chaos stood Kat Abu Ghazaleh, a young congressional candidate trying to stop the prisoner van from leaving. Seconds later, an ICE agent tackled her to the ground. The footage spread across social media like wildfire. Within 6 hours, the hashtag Chicago Freedom surpassed even international news trends. Everyone picked a side. No one talked about the cause anymore. From that moment in Broadview, Washington and Chicago officially entered one of the most unprecedented political clashes in modern American history. Chicago declared, "We will protect people." Washington answered, "We will protect the law." Both claimed to protect, yet the people were trapped in between. One side faced arrest, the other tear gas, and in the middle stood those holding up their phones live streaming, hoping to capture a shred of justice in a 15-second clip. Just days later, Mayor Johnson signed Executive Order 48A, a decree that transformed the entire city of Chicago into a network of ICE-free zones, where federal law stopped right at the city limits. Under the order, ICE officers were barred from entering buildings, parking lots, or private offices without the owner's consent. Schools, hospitals, and churches were all declared safe zones. Social media erupted in applause. There was only a sigh. Impressive, isn't it? Ridiculous. A city declaring that a federal agency cannot enforce federal law. It's like telling a police officer, "Sorry, you can't come into my house. I just don't like your laws." The Department of Homeland Security, DHS, couldn't just stand by. They responded, not with words, but with action. 2 new buildings were purchased, ICE offices were expanded, and dozens of additional federal agents were deployed, a cold, calculated response from Washington. On the map of the United States, Chicago is just a tiny dot in the Midwest, but in Washington's eyes, it was a symbolic battlefield. If this sanctuary for migrants survived, dozens of other states might follow, and that, to the federal government, was unacceptable. The press called it an immigration riot. Social media dubbed it the mini Civil War. Police said, "We're maintaining order." Protesters shouted back, "You're attacking freedom." Both sides looked at the same scene, yet told 2 entirely different stories, and the phone videos spread like a virus, fueling the flames of division between 2 worlds coexisting in one city. A Mexican woman screamed, "I came here for freedom! Why are they firing tear gas at me?" A police officer, gasping for breath, spoke into his radio, "We're under attack by the very people the mayor swore to protect." No one knew who was right or wrong. All they knew was that Chicago had become a mirror reflecting America's deeper divide. While the media and politicians argued over morality and human rights, the people of Chicago lived with a harsher truth. Crime had risen for 3 consecutive years. Affordable housing was disappearing. Factories in the South Side were shutting down one after another, and the city's public debt had soared past $48 billion US. Yet instead of talking about the economy or infrastructure, the city was busy debating who should be deported first. A veteran journalist put it bluntly, "When people can't solve a problem, they start choosing sides." Chicago, once the industrial heart symbolizing the American dream, had now become the new front line of the immigration debate. Ironically, the city praised as the city of compassion was witnessing people treated like criminals. Washington's response wasn't dialogue, it was more agents, more barriers, and more fear in the hearts of its citizens. ICE said, "We're just doing our job. No one stands above the law." Mayor Johnson replied, "You're violating the city's right to self-govern." 2 sides, 2 truths, 2 just causes, and a city breaking apart in between. The divide was no longer just on television or in Congress. It spread into neighborhoods, coffee shops, and morning train rides. Pro-immigration supporters called ICE the modern fascists. Pro-deportation voices labeled Chicago the nation's crime capital. Between the 2 opposing sides, there are thousands of people simply trying to breathe through each day. They carry no weapons, only hope. But that hope is trapped between 2 walls built from a single word: freedom, a word everyone claims to defend, yet no one is willing to share. No one dares to say it aloud, but Chicago is paying the price for its own kindness. When a city opens its arms to everyone, it must also be ready to embrace those who do not come in peace. But if you mention that online, you'll be labeled a racist. That's the American paradox. The clearer the truth becomes, the fewer people dare to speak it. Chicago, once celebrated as a symbol of freedom and diversity, now faces its own contradiction. The boulevards that once waved banners welcoming immigrants are now lined with tear gas and barricades. While buildings still hang banners proclaiming freedom for all, beneath their basements lie holding cells for the undocumented. People walk the streets with wary eyes. No one knows who's a friend or who might film them for a political hashtag. ICE says we're just doing our job. The mayor says we're protecting people. But the people only ask, when will we finally live in peace? To me, this wasn't just another fleeting protest. It was the eruption of years of silence, a clash between two visions now dividing America, to protect its borders or to protect its people. Broadview, a small town, yet it speaks for an entire nation. Is this the beginning of a new wave of resistance? 6 months from now, will this place return to peace or become the symbol of a turbulent new age of migration? A question that seems simple, yet no one can answer, because when law and trust shatter, every question becomes meaningless. The streets once lit by music are now lit by police sirens, walls once painted with slogans of freedom are now covered in soot and graffiti, and those who once shouted "Welcome to Chicago" now lock their doors at night. Sometimes when you try to build a humanitarian paradise, what you create instead is a perfect hell, a place where the law is torn apart by the very people who once swore to defend it. Chicago is no longer just the story of one city. It is a mirror held up to America, a country where everyone wants justice as long as that justice doesn't apply to themselves. And when a nation begins to argue over whose law is real, what it loses is not power, but the very soul of its democracy. Broadview was never just a protest. It was a message, a reminder that change often begins with those who have nothing left to lose. You can fire tear gas, build fences, arrest dozens, but you cannot arrest an idea. You cannot silence a movement that lives in millions of minds. Chicago, the city of freedom, once the pride of America. But now, it shows the world a painful truth. Freedom is not the absence of law, and humanity, without responsibility, becomes a double-edged sword. Because when justice itself is divided, no matter which side you stand on, you're still helping pull the nation closer to the abyss.